We're going to move on now and tell you a story that just kind of landed in my lap a few weeks ago, and it was just stunning to me. I got a call from John Ashworth, who is with the Lynching Sites Project of Memphis, and he said that he has a story that may interest me, and it was about a Baltimore-born man who overcame considerable hardship and very humble circumstances to become a Tuskegee Airman. But his life ended, tragically, and in the waning days of World War II. And here to tell us about this Lieutenant Manning's life, we're going to have Colonel Harry Stewart, who is himself a Tuskegee Airman and was a friend of Walter Manning and flew with him on that same mission where he was captured. And Barbara Williams, who has chased down the story of Manning's life down to every corner of the earth, and John Ashworth, who kindly told me about the story. And I believe it's John's birthday today, so happy birthday, John.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I want to start, before we hear from them, just want to start this. This is, Jenny Lyles, who's our historian and researcher extraordinary. She was able to dig up. This is the birth certificate of Lieutenant of Henry Manning, and it shows that he was born on, I can't see it now because these other things are here, May 3rd in 1920. Yeah, there we go. And this is really how it started. Now I'm going to allow our guests to tell us how it all happened. Barbara, or
John.
John, yes.
Good morning, Will, and good morning to all the panelists and to all the people attending. And thanks for having us from the Lynching Sites Project. Very quickly, the Lynching Sites Project started in 2015 much like from a speech made by Brian Stevenson. And we have documented in Shelby County alone over 35 lynchings that took place in Shelby County. We know that there were a little over 500 lynchings and near lynchings in the state of Tennessee. But the other thing I'd like to say about this is that about 1.5 years, maybe almost 2 years ago, Barbara told me about Lieutenant Manning, and I asked her if she would do the research and do a presentation to the Lynching Sites Project about the life and she did an extraordinary presentation that you're going to hear in a few minutes. But I want to make just one very quick observation, turn it over to her. A historian has said that as Europe developed into conflicts in 1939, one historian has written that by exporting arms to the democratic countries, the United States hoped to become the arsenal of democracy. What that historian did not go on to say that one of the other things that the United States exported was this idea of the lynching of African Americans. And that, of course, as you will hear, is the fate that befell Lieutenant Manning. And I would go on to add that as I think about his story, then I think about the story of African-American servicemen during the Revolutionary War, during the Civil War, during World War I, during World War II, on down to present day. And so I think in many ways, Lieutenant Manning, who is no longer with us, and Colonel Stewart, who is with us today, represents the essence of all the African-American soldiers that have fought for freedom while defending their own freedom. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Will. And congratulations on being placed in the Lewis Museum in Baltimore. That's really a nice thing. The birth certificate that you saw says that he was born, Walter Peyton Manning was born in Johns Hopkins University, hospital there in Baltimore. The next time we see him is in Philadelphia. There's a 1930 census which places him living in a home without his mother, but with a sister of the mother and the sister's husband. We have no records as of yet as to where he went to school, but all of the addresses that we have found, and there are 3 in Philly, are from West Philly. He registered for the draft July the 1st, 1941. He would have been 21 years and a couple of months old. And I found a description on his registration card. He had brown hair, brown eyes. He was of light brown complexion, and he was 162 pounds, 5 feet 10. He failed his first physical after he registered. And why? He had a hammer toe. Now, if you do not know what a hammer toe is, it might be called a mallet toe, but it basically says the four toes of your hand, usually one of those toes will be constricted. The tendons or the ligaments or the muscles just don't extend and flexed. So you end up with one foot, that's permanently in this position. And one of the ways that you can get rid of that is to have surgery. So the Army registration says that Manning had held at least 2 jobs. One was a locker boy in a Philadelphia, Montgomery County a country club. And he also was a machinist. I don't know what his salary would have been as a locker boy. I certainly hope the tips were good, but he had the surgery. He was successful. He took the exam for the U.S. Army Air Force for pilot training. He had always wanted to fly, according to Colonel Stewart. The minimum on that test to pass was 83. The max was 150. He scored 119. So on April 1st, in March 15th of 1943, he was accepted into the U.S. Army Air Force as a pilot. And by, and by August of 44, he was transferred to Ramitelli Air Force Base in southern Italy. On April 1st, 1945, a year had passed, and he had completed about 50 sorties, a mission escorting bombers coming back successfully. On this particular April 1st, he shot down one German firefighter, but he was hit by another. And out of the 7 men, the 7 pilots who were flying that mission that day, 3 were shot. One plane crashed, the Tuskegee Airman crashed and was killed. A second one, the plane was hampered, but the pilot was able to fly out and land in a friendly air base where today, or some time ago, it was called Yugoslavia, and he was able to get back to Ramitelli. The third plane was that of Second Lieutenant Walter Peyton Manning. He was able to bail out. The plane crashed. He was picked up on the ground by Austrians who had decided to kill him because that's what the German philosophy was. And the philosophy had an official title. It was called Flieger, Lynch, Justice. Flieger is flyer or aviator. Lynch is lynch, I guess in anybody's language. And justice is spelled with a Z, but it still means the lack of the proper justice. So he was turned over to the local police in an up and coming town called Linz. That was where they were in the country of Linz, having flown in from Ramitelli, and they were on their way back. Linz is about in today's train, it's about an hour, maybe an hour and a half west of Vienna. It's north of the Alps. So he was placed with the Austrian police. He was held for at least 2 nights, and probably either the late second night or possibly the third morning, early morning, 2 German officers entered the jail, and they had fake papers which allowed Manning to be released to them. They took him outside. They strung him up by a rope. He hung by a lamppost for several hours until one of the workmen there at the airport where he was being held came and they took him down. What you're going to see next is a video. And the land where you see this video is the spot where he actually was hung at the Linz Horshing Airport. The Austrian Department of Defense and Sport, this is the National Department of the Defense and Sport, had initiated some 20 years ago what happened to approximately 1,700 Allied air crewmen who were shot down in Austria alone, but survived the crash. And they were able to find that Second Lieutenant Walter Peyton Manning, a victim of Figure Lynch justice, but was a victim of the actual rope lynching, not just being shot or killed or bludgeoned in some other way. So they decided to honor him. In 2015, they found this information. In 2018, which is when the video you're going to see is April 1st, which is 73 years to the date that Colonel Stewart and Manning and 5 other pilots went on this last sortie for Manning. They decided to honor his horrific sacrifice in 2018. The other thing I want you to know about this video is that until this video was done, even though the research had been completed 3 years before, until the video was done, no one knew of the lynching by a rope. Family didn't know, excuse me, they just knew that he had been shot down in Austria. The person whom you're going to hear speaking is Colonel retired Harry Thaddeus Stewart Jr. At age 97, I think I'm correct, Colonel Stewart, that you are one of only 12 surviving Tuskegee pilots and eight. And you are one of several more of all the Tuskegee Airmen who held different positions within the US Army Air Force. You will see only Austrian military in this video because it is at the spot where Manning was hung. And there is a flyover. He was a pilot after all, but you will not see that. But you will see and hear Colonel Stewart speak about Manning and the reason why they're there today. So Will, if you will.
I would be happy to. I wondered if right before I do that, if I could ask Colonel Stewart a question, which is, how did you learn about what happened to Lieutenant Manning?
Well, actually, what happened was the mission that we went on at that time to Austria, and that happened to be on a Sunday, April 1st, 1945. Lieutenant Manning was listed as missing after that mission, and it was years later, quite a few years later, that an investigation had taken place, and his remains were discovered, and also through depositions of people who were witnesses at the time there testified as to the manner of death that he was meted with in Austria.
It's a horrible story. So let's watch the video now. Thank you.
Well, we're doing here memorializing Walter Manning. And it was nearly this date, 73 years ago, that we were on a fighter sweep in this area of the country here. And that's when Walter got shot down, and later on, about 3 days later, met his demise at the being captured by a mob and executed at the time. His name is Harry Stewart, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. I met Lieutenant Manning sometime before that, maybe a year and a half before that. We both went in the service together, and we went to the same field where we trained at. I joined up with him in the same squadron when I went overseas and joined him in the 301st Fighter Squadron in Ramitelli, Italy at the time. Manning was quite a guy, you know, and he wanted to fly very, very badly. He wanted to get his pilot's wings and do his duty for his country, and I guess he did all he wanted to do as far as the flying was concerned. That was what he was chiefly after. He wanted to be a fighter pilot. Well, it certainly means a great deal to me, being, you know, one of the 6 pilots who flew along with him when he met his demise, but The other thing is that the people of the United States know nothing about what actually happened to Walter Manning. And I'm hoping with all of this that we can take the story back to the United States and let the people know what had happened to him.
Company! Hey! Boom! Listen!
The biggest thing was the extent that the government had gone to memorialize the memory of Walter Manning, but also the display, the pageantry that they put on at the time there was just beyond any expectations that I had. And now the memorial that we see that stands over to the side of us is quite a tribute to the memory of Manning. Today we turn out to be allies, and quite comfortable allies. I think that he would be very forgiving and of the demise that he had, and I think that he would be very pleased with the memorial that had been named in his honor.
If I may, I'd like to read the English translation of the plaques you just saw where Colonel Stewart saluted. This is the spot where Second Lieutenant Walter P. Manning was murdered on the night, either the 3rd or the 4th of April, 1945. Walter P. Manning was born in 1920 in Philadelphia, and when he grew up, he was a member of the American 332nd Fighter Group, 15th U.S. Army Air Force. His airplane was shot down just south of Linz on the 1st of April, 1945. National Socialist officials and members of the German Air Force organized a hunt that ended with the hanging of Manning. Manning is one of the countless victims from the so-called aviator justice that the Nazi injustice regime unleashed against Allied aircraft crew in 1944. And then there's a space, and then they say, with an exclamation point at the end, they say, honor his memory.
Barbara, thank you so much. And you know, this work that you've done to document all this, you are honoring his memory, and I can't thank you enough for that. And I want to say before we just go on is that, you know, if we get this installation, well, I should say when we get this installation at the Lewis Museum, I want to be more positive about that. But we will certainly make a place to honor Lieutenant Manning there. It's too important. It's such a tragic story, and the dedication that he showed, the determination to become a flyer, and yet to meet not only the end that he met, but the indifference from his country is tragic. I wanted to ask you, Colonel Stewart, what do you remember about him? What kind of a man was he? And go ahead.
Well, he certainly was a very likable chap, and we had the same endeavors as far as learning to be pilots were concerned. And I had flown a number of missions with him before. He was a few classes ahead of me as far as graduation as a pilot was concerned, and therefore he had more missions than I did. I'd like to mention that the total number of missions to fly as a fighter pilot overseas at the time there before you were sent home on rehabilitation was 50 missions. And he had 50 missions, or might have exceeded that by maybe 1 or 2 missions, but he certainly was on register to go home at that time there. And if it wasn't for that fateful flight that he was on April 1st there, he would very likely be with us today. I'd like to also say that the memorial that took place in Austria took place April 1st, 2018, which was the 73rd anniversary of the demise of Walter, or the time that he went down. So in answer to your question before, as the timing of this was concerned, it was 73 years before he was fully recognized and given that memorial in Austria. And at the time there, as far as the lynching was concerned, is the depositions that were taking place by a number of the witnesses to the event. Anyway, I sort of lost the trend right there, but anyway, that was the 73rd anniversary, and sometime later, through a lot of research by both the Austrians and the American Graves Commission as to what had happened factually as far as Lieutenant Manning was concerned.
So I also know that you were very instrumental in making that day happen, and I wanted to know, I wanted to ask you why this was so important to you.
Well, it's important to me because I was surprised to find out here's a foreign country. Certainly, it was one of our adversaries at the time there, but a foreign country who recanted and took the moral courage to recognize the indignity that Walter Manning suffered, and they tried their best to pay some type of tribute to him by giving this a memorial. Yet, this was unknown by the people of the United States. A few people in the government intelligence service knew about it, but none of the people of the citizens of the United States, including the Black diaspora, knew anything of what was going on. And I just felt that it just would be so fitting to have some type of memorial given this day in the United States here for the dedication to his service, the citizenry, that type of thing as far as he was concerned.
Barbara, you mentioned a book that
I do, and I just put that in the chat. Colonel Stewart has written a book called Soaring to Glory, a Tuskegee Airman's firsthand account of World War II. And I also wanted to put in the middle of typing, another book. There is something called Missing in Action, Failed to Return. It is a PDF, and it lists all of the something under 1,700 deaths.
here it is.
There you go. Of airmen, Allied airmen who were shot down, survived the crash, but somehow under Fliegerleit's justice were killed before they were to be turned over a POW system and all of that. But the first 16, 17 pages are the philosophy of why the Austrian government did what it did, because it not only did this event on April 1st, 2018, but they've also done museum pieces, because they found that not only is the World War II participant memory being lost, but people who have heard the stories are beginning to forget, and it seems to be purposeful forgetfulness. And Austria wanted to remind people that these 1,700, plus the ones who went home directly, are the reason why Austria is free today. I worked in Austria one summer, in fact, in this very same town, and I remember my boss telling me, Barbara, we never thought we'd get rid of the Russians, because from 45 to 50, Russia took over Austria and finally were forced out. But she said, I never thought we'd get rid of them. And those are the memories that they want people to know how tenuous anybody's national security actually is.
It can't escape notice that, and Nick Creary actually wrote it in the comments, that it's more than ironic that the Austrian government has done more to memorialize and apologize for victim of lynching than the U.S. government has. John, there was a question for you as well about the connection between the NSDAP, fascist racial ideology and white supremacy practices in the United States. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, let me speak to that. In fact, as you saw me, I was looking for an article that I had on my desk because I also subscribe to newspapers.com. And there was an article that appeared in 1936. And what the article said was Hitler had agents in the United States that already had to exterminate African Americans if they had won the war. But the other comment I want to make, there's a very interesting book out, and I can't think of the author's name now, but the title of the book is Hitler's American Model. And that book very clearly articulates how it was that the Nazis looked at Jim Crow practices in the United States to come up with their plan for what they were going to do with Jews in Germany. But yes, there is that connection between the Nazis and white supremacy. It's all based on the same thing. And they actually, as a matter of fact, when you read the book, Hitler's American Model, what you find out is that some of the practices that the United States had doing Jim Crow.
We lost your audio there, John.
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry to say, when you read the book, one of the things that you'll find out is that the book, Hitler's American Model, is that the Nazis even thought some of the practices that the United States had went a bit too far insofar as racism is concerned. So yes, there is a definite connection between Nazism and white supremacy. It's all tied together.
There was a related question from Pat Halley about asking whether or not the Nazis lynched white and Black soldiers, or go ahead, Barbara.
The hearsay is that yes, they did. And there is another book out, came out in I'm sorry, I don't remember it, last year, I guess, 2020. And the author, works in a German university, but he used some of the same research areas that the other two authors of Missing in Action researched. And he found, and other people, and I think Colonel Stewart has said over the years, people have found cases or have heard of cases where people were lynched with a rope, both white and Black, but they haven't been verified.
Interesting.
May I say that a total of 7 Black pilots from the 332nd Fighter Group were listed as missing in the book Missing in Action here. And some of them, they still haven't found their remains there. They still continue to be listed as missing in action, but there is one that I had mentioned to you, Barbara, I believe, that we had just gotten recent word that he had been pitchforked to death by a group of people. So there was others other than Walter Manning there that probably met a rather horrible death there as far as the being captured is concerned.
Well, I can't thank you enough for bringing us this incredibly important and sad story. It needs to be known, and we're honored to have all of you join us today. And Colonel Stewart, we thank you, of course, for everything and for your service and for being here and for standing up for your friend. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Very much. I really appreciate it.